ladies and gentlemen. It's a Ukrainian talk show on Pod TV. My name is Sasha Star, and we have today our distinguished guests. We'll start with Jonathan Lockwood. Professor Jonathan Lockwood, welcome to the show.
Glad to be here, Sasha. Thank you.
Great to have you. Also, we have, or we may have, Ivan Kucherenko from Kiev, Ukraine. If we have him, let's see him. Shall we try more
It will
time?
be a pleasant surprise.
Really?
Yeah,
Okay. It's coming? Probably
I
not.
don't know.
He's
There,
not here right now, Sasha. I'll
Okay.
bring it goes up. Okay.
So we have a replacement. It's founder of the network, Nick Poliveda. Welcome to the show.
I
Nick.
can be on the show until Ivan gets here. He knows that we're not.
Okay.
then,
Good.
then he goes back on the bench.
Then I go back on the bench. You're right.
Warm the bench then, Nick.
There you go. I can warm the bench.
Good deal. Now, let's talk about something, what's happening now in U.S. Congress and politics, which very seriously affects the ability of Ukraine to continue a fight, have any chances to win the war. And we'll start with the notion that a new speaker, he is saying that he's not against helping Ukraine. What he wants to do, though, before they will proceed, he wants to see the joint declaration of Biden and Zelensky about the stated goals of the war, exactly what weapons Ukraine needs, and to account for all the weapons and help that Ukraine gets so far from US. I think it's a very, very good development because no one would allow in its right mind to write blank checks to Ukraine. And as much as I want Ukraine to win this war, but I understand the reality is that the blank check, if everything was going on around the world with situation in Israel, it's just not only impractical, it's just against any common sense to have such a procedure. However, the approach taken by the House as to require Biden and Zelensky jointly, believe it or not, to come up with all the goods and put them on the table, I think that it's a brilliant approach because I had my own reservations, which I was trying not to state in the situation where it was obviously the terrible attack of Russia against Ukraine and obviously uprising of Ukrainian people to defeat the Russians. But we are not talking about the Ukrainian people didn't do so and such. It's just a question of Zelensky's at his administration and at the same time Biden, because Biden, although he's helping Ukraine a great deal, he never stated the United States goals. What United States wants to achieve, during what period of time, what is required to achieve that. Nick, what's your opinion on that?
Your
Yeah,
grenade, Nick.
yeah, it puts me in the spotlight.
Yeah.
Well, the problem that the way I see it, Sasha, is that our leader, Biden, is not very good at articulating
Yes,
the U.S.
agreed,
position. In other words,
agreed.
something that David Walker brings up on this show, that we have a leadership problem in Washington, D.C. He should be very specific on the goals and objectives of the United
Nick,
States.
but be fair, at his age to articulate anything is a great thing, right?
Well, you know that's
Really?
true. He'd be fair at his age. But see, this is the problem, okay? And that's the problem with our parties in general. They do not groom younger people to take their positions. They are so drunk with power that they fail to realize they need to turn the baton over to somebody else. So I do not feel sorry for them. I feel the American public has been ripped off by the Democratic Party and the Republican Party because they both do the same thing, sending the same old junk to Washington every year and ramming it down our throat. Yes, Biden should bow out and Trump should bow out, both of them, and let new blood come into the leadership positions of the United States of America. Both of them are doing our country a major disservice. So my vote will be anybody else but those two. Throw anybody else on the ballot, ching, they get my vote because those two cannot be voted. And you're seeing one of the problems right now. I mean, when you get older, I'm sorry. I was in a state playing for 17 years, and I noticed cognitive decline takes place at 80. And Sasha, even in chess, Kasparov gives up at 50.
Sure.
In basketball, LeBron is playing at 38. By 40,
it's more physical activities.
Exactly. Well, mental, you can stay around for longer, but still at the same time, show me the world chess champion who's age 80. There isn't any. I mean, it's just the realities of life. So this guy should step down. He doesn't, and so we're left with a leadership vacuum because of his greed and his drunk thirst for power. So this is what we got.
Wait a second. To be fair, to Groom's successor, if you remember time of Ronald Reagan, he didn't have to worry about it because his vice president,
His vice president had the best resume practically ever.
Yeah, but he was a natural succession to Reagan. He didn't have to worry about the successor. So was with Bill Clinton. Gore could have been a natural successor.
President. He was close.
He was, but right. Now in this situation, when we have what's her
Kamala
name?
Harris.
Kamala Harris, that's not natural successor.
No. She was a pure political try to grab the vote, and he does this a lot. He leans on racism and sexism to collect votes. So he's one of the most racist and sexist presidents we've ever had. I see it creating a big problem. I think Arnold Schwarzenegger said, "Hey, bring in Joe Manchin." Okay, as much as I don't like Joe Manchin, I'd vote for him over Joe Biden. Frankly, because he's younger. Yeah, right. In other words, he'll bring a different energy to the party, but they refuse to let go of their iron grip over America. And it's a horrible situation, and it has ramifications around the world, including what we're seeing in Ukraine right now, because the Republican leader is correct. State your position, state it unequivocally, and let the world know what you're going to do. And
it's well done, because what his way of operating, John, it will be more of the question to you, is like, okay, he's agreeing with House and Senate on a certain budget, so certain things could be sent to Ukraine, and then he puts brakes on that what's already been approved. And you can send to Ukraine. Oh, wait a second, not so fast. Okay, we will send it, but not now. Okay, right. We'll send it in 6 months, maybe 3 months. We'll send not 200 the Atacoms. I will send it 20, and we'll see how well they do. If they do well, then we'll send another 15, and so on. And that comes strictly from Biden. The way I understand the workings of U.S. Administration and how things are done. John, maybe I'm missing something.
Well, not really. In this case, Mr. Johnson's approach, very interestingly, it throws a monkey wrench in Vladimir Putin's expectations, because Vladimir Putin, keeping in mind the Russian leadership is counting on American weakness and dividedness, and hoping that their support for Ukraine will fade. And that is not apparently going to be the case, because Mr. Johnson recognizes the importance of Ukrainian independence, and also of not appearing to give Russia any kind of a victory, whether through negotiation or any other kind of settlement, as Winston Churchill once stated, that based upon his study of the Russians, that the Russians respect nothing more than they respect strength, and they have nothing but contempt for weakness, especially military weakness. So in this case, to ignore that lesson of history is to invite more trouble. So in this case, Mr. Johnson has correctly read the lessons of history, and I believe that it is going to complicate the Russians' efforts to divide the West and to weaken support for Ukraine.
Hmm. So, what do you expect will happen next? Zelensky and Biden will have some fun time ahead
Well,
of
they
them?
will recognize the Zelensky and Mr. Biden will both recognize that they have a mutual shared common interest in presenting a united front, and however reluctantly on Mr. Biden's part, he will recognize the need to formulate a clear and coherent strategy. Because without, as I stated on another program, without a clear and coherent, you have no clear guideline for how much military power is needed, what kind is needed, and under what circumstances do you use that military power. Without that, all you have is a blank check for a forever war, and or the philosophy of more of everything is better,
So,
which is
what's
also
happening here? Okay, he's asking his budget. He's asked $60 billion for Ukraine help. So, what United States hopes to achieve for the $60 billion? Let's assume that this is for 12 months, right? So, what has to happen in 12 months?
I'll tell
Completely
you what has to happen in 12
making
months.
Moscow at what?
What has to happen in 12 months in order for this to have a satisfactory outcome at all is that Ukraine must be able to achieve a demonstrable operational victory over Russian forces in order to compel Russia. Yeah, the Russians aren't going to be persuaded. They must be compelled to accept a certain situation. It is not a question of asking nicely enough and then maybe they'll withdraw from Ukraine. No, they must be defeated. They must be compelled to withdraw because they have no other viable choice. So in this case, as much as the West wants to not be Mr. Nice Guy about the whole thing, no, not in this case. The Russians have clearly stated their political goals, and they are utterly irreconcilable with those of Ukraine. So either one side or the other must be compelled to give up its political objectives, and it would be absolutely suicide for Ukraine to give up its political objectives, which is independence from Russia.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I
Very,
mean, the
very.
thing is, Sasha, didn't we have this Budapest Agreement back in 1994, and we outlined the boundaries of Ukraine? I know
Yeah.
Dr. Locke has some comments on this, but it seems to me is that our friends in Russia tend to lie. They tend to not abide by any agreements. So to me, the unequivocal policy of the United States is to drive Russia completely out of the territories of Ukraine, including the Crimea, which we should have never allowed them in to begin with. And then we can talk about negotiations for peace and settlement.
Nick, but don't
Yeah, the
forget,
Budapest.
Crimea happened during the Obama administration, and I think that Obama's administration was particularly weak in foreign affairs issues.
Yeah,
And it
but the thing
only
is,
encouraged the subsequent aggression by
yeah, but
not doing anything.
that's what I'm saying. In other words, but the United States has shown its weakness in Afghanistan, its weakness in Iraq by withdrawing unilaterally and making another mistake. They assumed that the 400,000 quote trained Afghanistan army would be able to stop the Taliban, and they couldn't. They just laid down their arms and let them through. Now we look at the Ukrainians. They made another mistake. They assumed Russia would take Kyiv in 3 days, and Russia had their butts handed to them. Okay, with these intelligence mistakes, and I know you're a former military intelligence, Dr. Lockwood, how can the United States have any credibility in the world when they continually make blunders on the chessboard. And this goes back to our leadership, our intelligence, and they're blundering again today. In other words, they're playing like blundering fools. But our policy hasn't been stated equivocally. And it should be something really simple, especially to a country like Russia. We are going to maintain the sovereignty of Russia, of Ukraine, by restoring the borders to the borders that you agreed upon, and you're going to leave the Crimea, you're going to leave eastern Ukraine, or you're going to be blown up until you do leave. And that's pretty simple. Can they understand it? Yes, if you start sending over the airplanes and the equipment that we have that Russia currently doesn't have. They do not have the strong military in the United States. And of course, I agree with Dr. Lockwood. We also put our Star Wars defense up, and that neutralizes their, oh, I've got nuclear weapons argument.
If the United States, what the Russians fear, based on my research and analysis over the past several decades, what the Russians fear more than anything else, even though they might not come out and state it directly, their actions and their other related actions indicate that this is true. What they fear more than anything else is the potential of American technology in cooperation with NATO to neutralize the one thing that the Russians believe make them a great power, their nuclear missile arsenal. That's why they greatly feared the Strategic Defense Initiative back in the mid-1980s. And when one of their KGB reports to Gorbachev stated that the US SDI program would eventually be able to block 90% of Soviet missiles, and there was no way the Soviet Union could keep up with that capability. Never mind that the SDI program was strictly research and development. The Russians believed that we had and were about to develop that capability, and they literally spent themselves into bankruptcy trying to counter what was essentially a phantom program, purely research and development. But now, with the demonstrated capability of Patriot in Ukraine, with it just by itself able to intercept nearly 100% of ballistic missiles, that tells the Russians have been afraid of the Patriot system ever since the mid-1980s. And they saw it as the leading edge of Star Wars. They saw it as a potential strategic defense system for the United States. Never mind, there was none such. They were exaggerating its capability in their own minds. And so now they fear it even more now that the Patriot has demonstrated what it can do at the operational level. If you combine that with a concerted effort by the United States and its NATO allies to construct a global ballistic missile defense system through the upgrading of the Space Force to give it a space fleet in Earth orbit, armed with laser weapons that are capable of conducting boost phase intercept of nuclear missiles. Once you have that system operating with existing U.S. ballistic missile defense systems, you have the makings of what I call an interlocking shield system of ballistic missile defense, which would effectively neutralize the nuclear arsenal not only of Russia, but also of China, North Korea, and any other would-be rogue nuclear state. That is the key to long-term neutralization of nuclear weapons and to the creation of strategic stability worldwide. But first and foremost, Ukraine must not be allowed to be made subservient to Russia. They must not be. Their independence must be preserved. Russia must be driven out of Ukraine, and we must be able to whether it's by individual bilateral agreements between Ukraine and other NATO members or other means. But its defense must be consolidated, and Ukraine must be made the eastern bulwark of the NATO alliance.
Jonathan, what do you think? Is U.S. already working?
My grenade. Thank you.
Oh, I would agree.
I would follow simply because of what you just stated. With this shield providing a very solid deterrence to Russian plans, do you think that U.S. already started to work on implementation of such a shield against Russian?
I think that they are beginning it. without stepping into the classified realm, because obviously I'm not going to state that sort of thing, would it be a logical thing for U.S. planners to be thinking about? Yes, it would.
But
It would be a logical thing for them to be thinking about. As far as implementation, I have no way of knowing that, and so.
And even if you would know, you wouldn't share it with us,
And
right?
if I did know, I wouldn't tell you. so,
Sasha, when you're playing poker, do you show the two cards that were dealt to
I'm
you?
holding a royal flush. No, you'd
You
hope
ever
so.
show the cards?
Sometimes I show one card.
You show maybe you show one card, but you don't
That's
show all
one.
the cards, and you let the other side guess the
Yeah,
string.
for example, I
Well,
may have ace and 4, so I show ace.
The Russians were very scared. The Russians were very scared, and are, mind you, by what they see. They have no way of knowing what additional cards we have that we just have decided to play yet. And so long as you can, and that is one of the beauties of ballistic missile defense. Whenever you introduce ballistic missile defense into the strategic equation and you have some means of blocking nuclear strikes, you introduce great uncertainty into the mind of your opponent as to what is likely to happen. If Putin were to threaten to launch a nuclear strike, and they've been doing a lot of brandishing of it,
sure.
if you introduce ballistic missile defense into the equation, Mr. Putin has no way of knowing how many of his missiles would actually get through. He has no way which ones would get through. What he does know is that if his nuclear strike, if he chose to carry it out, failed in its objective of destroying the opponent as a political entity, he could expect a devastating nuclear counterstrike from the U.S. and its NATO allies, but nuclear arsenals of which do outnumber those of Russia. They have the single largest arsenal in the world. They don't have more nuclear weapons than all the other nations of the world combined.
Right. World War III would be over very quickly. There would be no Moscow. There would be no Leningrad or St. Petersburg. There would be no Vladivostok and Stalingrad. Remember, there's only 4 cities. The rest of it's nothing. Russia is not a superpower. I agree with David Walker. It's not a superpower. It has 2 or 3 cities that are major cities, and then that's it. They don't have anything, and the only way they kept their economy going is oil that they sold to India, which may not be our ally, because the thing is, in this whole thing, the Eastern Bloc is showing, hey, we lean more toward Russia than we do the United States. And the United States needs to flex its muscles. Our muscles are bigger than that. We're bigger, we're stronger, we're badder, and we can end this war overnight. Because the thing is, Russia cannot withstand the power of the U.S. And I agree, the Patriot system. Come on, look what goes in Israel. 3,500 missiles were fired from the Gaza Strip, and they all got blown down. That Patriot thing is pretty bloody impressive. Can you imagine 3,500 nuclear weapons launched by Russia, and they're all destroyed? Well, it's
that
over.
is the potential, Nick. That is the potential of potential of ballistic missile defense in the 21st century. It's far beyond what was originally estimated when Star Wars was first declared. And because what people do not realize, most people do not realize, the existence of the U.S. Space Force, it by itself does not mean very much, because right now the U.S. Space Force, according to open sources, consists of 80 satellites. To the Russians and the Chinese, that is not a Space Force. That is a set of 80 targets that can be exploited or destroyed.
And that's
with a Space Force, you need a space fleet.
And that's assuming Russia's technology can even launch something. Look what they did when they launched to the moon. They wanted to send a satellite to the moon. It crashed and burned. India landed theirs. Russia didn't. Like I said, the only thing I'm worried about is that if Russia launches a nuclear attack, they may destroy one of their friends, Brazil, because they don't even aim their stuff right. Look at what's going on there. They're running to China to beg for bullets.
Well, it's horrible, Nick.
How incompetent can that country be? How can they win a war? They're all drunk off their own vodka over there, Sasha. They don't have a chance against the United States of America.
This is a horrible disaster, what you just said, that Russia will hit Brazil, which is a BRICS country. So how
Yeah.
dare they are to attack
I'm
this?
just saying. I'm just saying that
I
they're
just,
demonstrating. They're demonstrating how bloody incompetent they are. So if they decide we're going to declare war against the United States, they have some serious problems. One, will any of their things get through, or is it all going to hit Brazil? Number two, okay, will any of their stuff even work? I mean, and then we do know one thing: our stuff does work. And so the thing
We
is, like I
test
said,
it regularly.
this war will be over very quickly. Our only problem is, do we want to level Moscow or just take it over? Same with St. Petersburg, because those are lovely cities, But in terms of war, they don't have a chance. So all his saber rattling, all this other stuff, he's holding no cards. He's holding no cards.
I'd like
We
to
have
tell you
we have
something.
we're holding double aces, and he's hoping to pull something on the river.
He's hoping he's holding a 2-3. He's holding a 2-3.
He's holding 2-3 offsuit.
I'd like to tell you something interesting. In back in 1988, there was a chess Olympiad in Greece, and my wife was playing there, so I was there with her, and I was introduced to Gary Kasparov, who was already he was very young, but he was already a world champion, and we had about 30, 40 minutes conversation over coffee and so on. And I asked Gary what he thinks about ability of USSR, which was already shaky. The perestroika already started, and it was kind of a very uncertain situation at the best for Russia. And what do you think? How they can be on par with United States and the West? And Gary said there is no way that they can be on par with the West and United States. And there are several reasons, but the main reason is that Russia fell so much behind in computer technology, chips, and all these things. It's hopeless. I mean, it's not 20 years, 30 years, it's done forever. And with this situation, Russia has no chance to be on par with the West and particularly with the United States. It was 1988. It was still believed that, well, Soviet Union will recover, but never happened.
In 1990, Sasha, in 1998, I do recall that the exchange rate between the ruble and the dollar, because this was just before the Russians devalued their currency and knocked several zeros off, the exchange rate was 5,000 to 1. 5,000 rubles to the dollar. And let me give you a historical example. When I visited Moscow in 1992, and I went, my American colleagues and British colleagues, we all went out to a Russian restaurant. And the exchange rate then was 90 rubles to the dollar. Okay, not too bad, but we paid for we had a 5-course Russian meal, all the trimmings, vodka, the whole bit. Now, for dinner for 5 at a Russian restaurant, how much in American dollars would such a meal cost for 5 people? How much would it cost if you went at work could
Maybe
have such a meal?
$50.
About
No, it would
five,
cost. Say again, Nick.
about $250 to $300.
Okay, yeah, Nick, you're a lot closer. That would have been about right. Then when we paid for when the bill came and we paid in rubles, I sort of did a back of the envelope calculation and looked at that. That dinner for 5 cost the equivalent of $18. $18 then in 19 when the exchange rate was 90 to 1. At 5,000 to 1, it costs pennies. It just utterly collapsed. It's like what I was saying. If you want to feel like a rich man, go to Moscow. If you want to feel like a poor man, go to Tokyo.
And then fly from Tokyo to Russia, experience the difference.
It'll
The difference.
be a nightmare. But in
Yeah.
any case, you get my point. The Russians economically, their strength, such as it is, rests on a very narrow base. Their oil exports, and if the price of oil drops, and all we would have to do is if the United States says, well, I think we're going to go back to increasing oil production and make ourselves self-sufficient and be a net oil exporter like we were during the previous administration, and we were to do that, all of a sudden Russia finds themselves in a very, very weak position. And you notice that while the United States was a net oil exporter, the Russians weren't undertaking any aggression against Ukraine. Now you have this situation where, there are means that the United States can adopt which would effectively neutralize Russia, both in the short term and the long term. The problem is, forgive me for sounding like a broken record, but until you have a coherent strategy that clearly lays out objectives and goals and the ways to attain that, you have no clear guideline then for how much you are going to spend on military power, how much you're going to spend on what types of military power, and how the strategies you will use to implement that. Until you have that, you have no blueprint. Without a blueprint, you have no strategy. Without a strategy, you have no end to potential wars.
Absolutely agree. Yeah. Well, gentlemen, I appreciate very much your participation in this program, and we'll see you shortly on Friday, same place, same time. Thank you very much for all our listeners. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.